Hello and welcome to another video from FJC Guitar. Now this is the second part of a two-part series covering the restoration of an Antoria EG794BK Jazzstar Archtop made in Korea in the late 80s and sold in the UK. I purchased this guitar from a seller on Facebook Marketplace in late August 2025, so the guitar was approaching 40 years old at that point, and it certainly looked it. Although the guitar was basically structurally stable, it was covered in grime and dirt, and most of the metal parts aside from the pickups and the tailpiece were badly corroded. The pickups were falling to pieces, and although the frets only had light wear, several of the fret ends had sprouted out of the fingerboard, and my ham-fisted efforts to tap them back down with a brass-headed dead hammer just resulted in the frets becoming dented. Although I'd initially only intended to replace a couple of worn frets, at that point I made the decision to completely refret the guitar. Now, although I had removed and reseated a couple of frets on my other Antoria Jazzstar, I'd never done a full refret on a guitar before, so I was very much jumping in at the deep end. To further complicate matters, the neck binding was already beveled at the sides of the fretboard, making it necessary to blend the ends of the new frets into the shoulder of the fingerboard when beveling them off. So I've managed to remove all the frets reasonably cleanly. There was a little bit of splinterage at the top here, but I've just harvested some rosewood dust off a file down an old bridge, rosewood bridge, and wicked some super glue into the little splintered part. This is where I started taking the frets off, and I got a lot better at doing it when I got down to the bottom of the fretboard. So that's all taken care of. Some of the frets, especially at the top end here, had sprouted out at the edges. A combination of that and actually removing the frets, or maybe the way the fretboard was filed down or finished at the factory. The binding tends to be a little bit high under the fret ends, which I don't like. I want the new frets to sit nice and flat. So I've just been going over the fretboard with the levelling beam, of course. Now this fretboard has a compound radius. It starts off with a 16-inch radius or so at the top of the fretboard, and it ends up at about a 14, I think. I want to try and preserve the original radius of the neck, so I'm not going too heavy on this thing. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll just go to a little bit of a finer grade paper, polish things up a little bit, and we'll be ready to install the frets. Clearing the fret slots out. Now what I'd failed to do properly here was adequately clear out the fret slots, both in terms of depth and in terms of width actually, because the guitar had sat for several days at this point without any frets on it. So I think the slots had closed up a bit, and also I didn't do a good enough job of clearing out the debris, bits of old glue and such like in the bottom of the slot. As you can see, I've made a right mess there with the super glue. Although in fact that was a damp microfiber cloth, so what's actually on the fretboard's water, not super glue. But yeah, it required far too much work to actually tap the frets in a lot of the time. And when I look at the footage back, with the benefit of hindsight, there was quite a lot of frets that just weren't seated properly. And it shouldn't take that much work to actually get them to seat properly in the fretboard. Okay, so the frets are in. This was my first refretting job, and I have to say it was extremely stressful, very nerve-wracking throughout, but I think with things like this you've just got to start. There's always going to be a first time when you're going to do a job like this, and no amount of research and watching YouTube videos, and believe me, I've watched a lot of YouTube videos on this stuff, can prepare you for what it's actually like when you actually do the job. So it's not absolutely perfect, but I think it's better than it was. For some reason the first few frets were quite difficult to get seated properly, although I did try to clean the slots out before I put the frets in. But one step I actually forgot was I was going to get the Dremel with a very small bit and make sure that the slots were cleaned out. I just used a knife blade to scrape them out. These were pre-cut frets, so there wasn't actually much to snip off the ends. So I just used this to obviously bevel the ends of the frets. And I had to cut into the binding a bit because I think either when the frets were originally put on, or maybe it's been refretted in the past, I doubt it. The only way to get these frets beveled properly was to cut into the corner of the binding with this file. Otherwise he just had razor sharp edges. The binding was beveled off quite heavily to start with, so there was just no other way around it, and the best result that I got was to actually just keep going until the very corner of the binding here was kind of taken away, and that gave us a reasonably smooth profile at the end of the frets. As I say, not perfect, but it's never going to be perfect the first time you do it. The next thing to do is to level it. So obviously I'll straighten the neck again just to double check that it's absolutely straight. Now of course when you're leveling newly installed frets, you wouldn't really expect much material to be taken off unless there was a serious problem with the geometry of the fingerboard itself. And while I was leveling them, I did notice that there was a few frets that were quite difficult to reach. They just weren't being touched by the leveling beam at all, whereas some others were having a fair bit of material taken off them. But specifically the 5th fret, the top of the 5th fret, I'd managed to curl it over a bit when I banged it into the fretboard. And of course, being a bit of a perfectionist, I eventually became completely dissatisfied with this and decided to take out the 5th fret and reinstall it. And that took about 4 or 5 attempts. I was becoming increasingly frustrated. And when I did eventually get the 5th fret reinstalled to my satisfaction, and then I started to resume leveling the board, the 5th fret was sitting so low that I had to take off loads and loads of material off all the other frets just to get the leveling beam to even touch the 5th fret. At which point I just thought, this is a bad job, and I removed all the frets and started again. So this is about 6 days later. I've had the frets out, put them in again, but I did take great pains to clear out the fret slots this time using the Dremel. Probably to a fault, I probably overdid it actually. But they went in a lot easier second time around and didn't require quite so much beating to get them to sit in the fretboard properly. And now I'm just beveling them off, and I'm doing so very, very carefully. So I've pretty much finished beveling off the ends of the frets here, and so obviously we've just got some leveling to do, and I'm hoping, this being the second attempt at putting the frets on this guitar, I'm hoping that there won't actually be much material coming off the tops of these frets. I've gone across it quickly with the rocker. It looks pretty good actually, and I did have to replace fret 3 just as I'd started to do the beveling process, because I happened to check it with the rocker, and this was from the second attempt at fretting this guitar, and fret 3 was high, so I had to take that out. But the more I work on this thing and the more I sort of rectify the problems, the easier it's becoming, to the extent that when I realised I had to take a fret out again and put a new one in, it wasn't the end of the world. Whereas a week ago or more, when I first attempted this, I would have been having an anxiety attack about having to pull it apart again. But the 3rd fret came out no problem, went back in lovely, seated properly. So I think it's just a question of doing it, and unless you're very, very lucky, or you have a natural flair for this kind of thing, the first time you do it, you're going to make a mess of it, basically. And I do think I have a natural flair for this kind of thing, but nevertheless, the first time you do it, it's not going to be great, and that's just one of those things. That's why you do it on your own guitar. If I overlay the picture of the other guitar, you can see how the fretboard, the binding at the edge of the fretboard is completely squared off. It's a right angle corner, and the frets are just trimmed to the edge of the binding, and then they're beveled off, and no problem at all. This one, before I'd even started working on it the first time I took the frets off, had already had this angle put into the corner of the binding, a 45-degree angle or thereabout. It was probably a little bit more rounded off originally, but there was this shoulder, as you can see here, on the edge of the binding. So when I put the new frets on, and this is the case both first and second attempts, not only does obviously the fret overhangs the edge of the binding, as you would expect, but there is no way to trim the fret flush with the edge of the binding. So what you have to do is kind of blend this fret end into the curve or the shoulder at the edge of the binding without taking off loads of binding, of course. And that was the challenging part. Now, I made a few mistakes on the first attempt as well. Slightly took a little bit too much binding off because I was far too heavy-handed with the beveling file. So on the second attempt I really took my time, and what you find is that as you're using the beveling file, a sort of sliver of fret starts to come down the side of the binding. So what I found it useful to do when this little lip of fret starts to drop along the side of this beveled edge is just carefully trim it off with the knife, and that gives you a much better idea of where you are with the file. But yeah, a difficult and challenging job for a first time refret. Something of a baptism of fire. And I think that having made 2 attempts at this, I'm 100% better at dealing with issues second time around, so it's been a really valuable learning experience. Okay, frets are levelled and all masked up, ready for recrowning. There's not a lot came off. There was a couple were a little bit lower than the rest, just a fraction, so I just had to go over a few times until I touched the tops of those frets, but nothing, nothing noticeable to the eye. And I finally got a crowning file which works. I'll be using the narrower of these two. I've tested it on another fret, and unlike many of the files I've had, this one actually works. Previously, when doing crowning, I've just been using this triangular safe file, which works very well, but it's a little bit more time consuming. So I'm gonna test this again just to be double sure, because obviously I don't want it to touch the crown section of the fret, just the sides, and I'll test it again and hopefully I'll make short work of this. Yes. What? That's my strower, the double D. Hang on a minute, yeah. You videoing? No, I'm. Well, yes, actually. I'm polishing my frets. Just give us 2 minutes, yeah. Just to finish this. And this is why you run a piece of masking tape down either side of the fretboard first, before you put the lateral pieces across, because when you peel the long pieces off, it helps the short pieces come off. Right, I think it's time to put the electronics back in. Well, pretty soon we're going to find out whether this was actually worth the bother in any real sense. This is quite fiddly. So at extreme length I've got the electronics in the guitar, I've got the tailpiece on, I've got the pickup screwed on, and I'm just putting the pickguard bracket on now, ready for the pickguard. And I did a quick test of the pickups just with a screwdriver with the guitar plugged into an amplifier before I put strings on, just to make sure that I get some kind of signal out of it, which I do. So we're getting very, very close to being done. Right, so we've got most of the hardware back on the guitar now. I've just basically got to decide which strings I'm going to put on it. Everything's gone on okay, nuts back on. I'm taking a gamble on the idea that we're going to be able to use the original nut. I don't think it's going to be too low because it was pretty high before I refretted the guitar. So we'll see. I won't find out until I actually put some strings on, and then I can start to work on that. But pickguard's on, pots are in, tailpiece is on, truss rod cover, that'll come back off. I just put that on just to see what it would look like. Looks good. Switch is on the right way around, strap buttons are on, and I've even cleaned up the bridge. I sanded it down a little bit and just lightly oiled it, and I think it looks a lot nicer than it did originally. So obviously that's going to go on here, and the finishing touch will be a nice new set of knobs, because one of them was cracked, and I'll do that when I've tightened up these nuts here. These are a little bit small. They're about the only thing I'm not happy with. The shafts on these pots are just a hair narrower than the originals were, and we're just starting to get a little bit too small for the holes. These holes would have been big enough for full-size pots, but yeah, I'm not going to start messing around with it now. I can always come back to these things in the future and make little tweaks once I find out whether the guitar was even worth bothering with in the first place. So when you next see this guitar, I'll have strung it up, done any adjustments to the nut slots, and put the knobs on, and fingers crossed it's going to be a playable guitar. There's far more work gone into this than I intended, but hopefully it was all worth it, so we'll see. Okay, well this is the Antoria finally finished. It's taken a while. I actually finished it about 6 weeks ago, but I had a cold and I got busy with work and stuff, and I never got around to filming part 2 of the video, but here it is anyway, and it's turned out really nicely. Of course, the colour of the guitar being black, it's an absolute magnet for fingerprints, but it has turned out very nicely indeed. The only way you can tell it's not really a new guitar is the discoloration on the binding, I would say. The fretboards turned out really nicely. I left the fingerboard in a kind of a sort of matte finish really. I didn't polish it up too much, I didn't want it to look too shiny, so it's got a nice sort of satin finish on it. And of course it's been completely refretted, as you know. There's no dead spots on the fretboard, it's really nice, the neck's nice and straight. I did make a change initially when I put the pots in. I'm not an expert in guitar wiring by any stretch of the imagination, but the B pots were used as volume controls and the A pots were used as tone, and I thought that was back to front. I had been led to believe that they used the A pots for the volume and vice versa, so I swapped them round. And I didn't like the result, so I put it back the way it was from the factory. I checked the other Antoria guitar, which is over there in the background, and that was also wired up the same way, so it's obviously intentional. And even now, the tone control has a very significant effect on the volume as well. So if you roll the tone right back, you really lose a lot of the volume. I don't know if there's perhaps a better way of wiring this guitar up. I just went by the original wiring and copied it. But the pickups themselves seem to be okay. I've got no particular complaints about them. It's just the slightly odd behaviour of the controls, I think. So it's quite nice. It's very heavily built, of course. The body is very thick. There's a lot of finish on the guitar. Since restoring this one, you can see in the background there, I've got hold of an Epiphone Emperor Regent, and that's a much lighter guitar, and it's got a lot more acoustic tone. I mean, if I turn this off, it's got sound, but you can tell it's strangulated. The top, although it's a big guitar, it's got a big thick body. It's thicker than the Epiphone. There's still not a lot of resonance coming out the top. It feels completely strangulated, so it hasn't got a tremendous amount of acoustic volume. The other thing you'll notice is the bridge here. A few weeks after I finished the guitar, I wasn't happy with the intonation, and that is in fact the way you've got to put the bridge to get this thing to intonate more or less correctly. It does look quite strange, but I gave the bridge the same treatment as the fingerboard. I sanded it down to get rid of it. It had acquired a nasty shine and it didn't look very nice. So I think the guitar looks beautiful. They're not amazing guitars. I don't know what the price point of these things was when they first came out. When you play a nicer guitar, you certainly hear the difference. But for the money, this one was 250 British pounds. Sure, the fingerboard was in a bad state, and it wouldn't be cost effective if I'd had to send this to a luthier to get it sorted out. I don't think it would have made much sense financially, but as it was, I did all the work myself. I'm very happy with it. It looks in very good condition now, whereas when it turned up it looked in very, very bad condition. Yeah, very, very happy with it. I put 12s on this one anyway, but because of the longer scale length, you really do feel the tension. These strings feel really stiff. So I've tried to put the action down as low as I can get it. yeah, it's nice. It's quite playable. It does have a nice tone, especially when it's plugged in. It's very bright. It's hard to get that sort of muted jazz tone out of this guitar. Certainly, but I'm just using the little Yamaha model in amp here. But it is nice. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that look at the black, quite rare black Antoria Jazzstar from 1989 or whenever it was built. Absolute bargain, but it really did rest on me being able to do the work myself. They're not the best guitars in the world, but for the money, you're just not going to get a full 17-inch lower bout heavy archtop jazz guitar, and they are usable. If you fiddle about with it, I dare say as time goes on I'll figure out how to get better tone out of this guitar. But playability wise, it's absolutely great. Absolutely lovely. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and sorry for the long delay between videos, but I'll try to upload a bit more regularly in future. And thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. So bye bye for now.